300,000 people who are super isolated are 50% more likely to die by any cause. Human beings are wired for social connection. So when people are isolated, there is a chance that men are more vulnerable. It increased the risk of death by 78%, and in women it was only 57%.
True or false? Online friendships affect the brain the same way in-person ones do.
That one's got to be false.
Science shows that loneliness can be as toxic and unhealthy as 15 cigarettes a day. So why does our brain need friends?
Dr. Ben Rein
is an award-winning neuroscientist and author of Why Brains Need Friends,
whose research and teaching explore the biology of social connection.
As Chief Science Officer of the Mind Science Foundation, Stanford lecturer, and science communicator to over 1 million followers.
He bridges cutting-edge neuroscience with real-world impact.
What do you think are some of the big things that people are getting wrong, especially when it comes to like the cause of autism?
40 to 60% of autism cases are related to genetics. Then there are also environmental toxins, maternal stress, maternal sickness during pregnancy.
The pandemic was non-consensual. What do you think happened to humans based on the research that you have in your book going through that kind of global isolation?
The group that I am most concerned about the outcomes of this period is...
Welcome to the Dr. Brighten Show, where we burn the BS in women's health to the ground. I'm your host, Dr. Jolene Brighten, and if you've ever been dismissed, told your symptoms are normal or just in your head, or been told just to deal with it, this show is for you. And if while listening to this, you decide you like this kind of content, I invite you to head over to drbrighten.com, where you'll find free guides, twice weekly podcast releases, and a ton of resources to support you on your journey. Let's dive in. Science shows that loneliness can be as toxic and unhealthy as 15 cigarettes a day. So why does our brain need friends?
Long ago, when it came down to survival of the fittest, the best human for survival on Earth is one that wants to be around others, one that actually feels joy and pleasure from being around others. And so our brains, thanks to evolution, have social reward systems built in. So we actually experience feelings of joy. You know, most people can kind of relate to this. You know, you go to hang out with friends and you come out afterwards and you're like, wow, that actually really improved my mood. I feel a lot better. And there's a lot of research showing that that's true, that people feel better after socializing. But what's really happening when we socialize is our brains are releasing neurotransmitters that make us feel good and make us feel like we want to come back and do it again. Dopamine, right? It's reinforcing. And so, yes, socializing is associated with the release of dopamine, reinforcement, oxytocin, which is, the social bonding, and serotonin, which is also, related to mood. But it turns out that actually oxytocin is like the first thing. It's like the first domino that falls that knocks over the other two dominoes of serotonin and dopamine.
We're going to get into it today.
Yeah.
As we talk in this conversation of loneliness, if someone's feeling isolated right now, what is that doing to their brain? What do we actually know? And, you're probably going to have and we don't know, big question mark as well.
Yeah, well, true. I can't tell you what we do know, though. So when people are isolated, because what I said before, that we are a social species, and so we prefer to be around each other. When we're not around each other, that in an ancient world was a big problem. Because if you're on your own in an ancient world where, your likelihood of dying basically goes straight up. And so the brain needs some sort of mechanism to say, hey, this is a problem, you should find your community again. And so the way this basically plays out is that being isolated is a form of stress. When humans are isolated, they start to show rises in cortisol and basically triggers the HPA response, the stress response. Short-term stress can be a good thing because when we are stressed for a short period, whether it's from isolation or stress at work or a saber-toothed tiger presenting itself to battle, our bodies kind of prepare for the challenge. And so we can, it can be anti-inflammatory. We can have all these great benefits. It changes in the brain as well with receptors going to the outside of neurons, ready to take in new signals is really fascinating. But then when the stress stays for a long time, so for example, if we are isolated for an extended period, that adaptive stress response becomes maladaptive, becomes unhealthy. And so in long-term stress, what we often see is chronic inflammation because cortisol is anti-inflammatory. I know that's confusing. You just it causes inflammation, but it's anti-inflammatory. Well, with chronic stress, the body's tissues become sort of desensitized to the cortisol's ability to normally turn down inflammation. So in lay terms, basically the one of the body's anti-inflammation systems is out of order. And so what happens is this rise in inflammation that can affect all these tissues in the body, including the brain. And so the stress response itself over the long term probably has a direct relationship with the mood deficits we see. So isolated people are at higher risk of anxiety and depression, also suicidality. But as far as the health detriment, right? People are at higher risk of dementia, diabetes, heart disease, stroke, all sorts of obviously things you don't want to happen.
Yeah.
And it's not all necessarily related to this inflammation, but a fair amount of it probably is. And there's this one study that kind of paints this picture really well that I love. I think it's such a fascinating study. So it's in mice. It's Dr. Louise McCullough's lab at University of Houston. They were studying stroke. And so they would induce a stroke in the mice by basically restricting an artery. Blood does not go to the brain for some amount of time. Then they allow the artery to start flowing again. And so the blood returns. And so what you have is this very scientifically controlled stroke, right? Like let's say 30 seconds, there's no blood. And so, it's controlled so well because this is science. We want everything should be replicable. And so what you would expect is that all of these mice that go through this procedure would have the exact same damage in the brain, the exact same severity of stroke. And that's generally true, but they found that certain mice had much bigger, more severe strokes, and they didn't know why. And so they started looking back in their notes, and what they realized is that those mice that had worse strokes were living in single housing. They were isolated. And so even though they had gone through the exact same stroke, the damage that they showed in the brain was much worse. I mentioned that inflammation might be a key problem. So what they found is that when they suppressed those inflammatory signals in the brains of these mice and then gave them a stroke, the stroke was the normal size again. So it seems like when these mice were isolated, they were experiencing more inflammation, neuroinflammation. They experience a stroke. And now because the brain's not functioning properly and there's all this inflammation in the way, there's more dead cells. And so the severity is worse. The mice were more likely to die. They were less likely to show recovery after. And so now if we take this out of mice and we apply it to humans, which, you shouldn't really do that, but it's a similar context, right? I just mentioned people are at higher risk of heart disease, dementia, all these conditions. Well, if the body's tissues are not functioning properly, and if there's all this inflammation, it makes us much less resilient to challenge and to damage. And so, people who have a stroke, when they exit the hospital and they go into single housing where they're not with others, they're much more likely to have severe outcomes or have another stroke. And it kind of makes sense when you think, okay, yeah, chronic stress response, being isolated, that we may not even really perceive, which is why I'm kind of so concerned about it, has all this underlying quiet, whispered health effects on our longevity that can play out, in any really way.
Okay, before everyone spirals, right? Because we're sitting here hearing this, being like, oh my gosh, there's all these adverse health outcomes. And we know women are at very high risk for cardiovascular disease and events as they enter into menopause, higher risk of possible hip fractures. And we already have covered so many times on this podcast the mortality rates, which they just are not great when you have to talk about them and you look at what's the future. When we start to pair this with what you're saying now, it feels even more kind of doomsday. So before people start to spiral, what's an easy way that they can start to mitigate some of this?
Socialize. This is the thing that I hate about speaking about this topic, is that it naturally leads to this conversation of what can we do, right? And it's
so why do you hate that?
I hate that that there's no well, here's a special tip that you hadn't thought about before, right? It's no, just interact with people. The other thing too is that people tend to have a lot of self-imposed barriers to interaction, a ton, so many. I mean, just think about the last time someone invited you out and you felt, last minute you're oh gosh, do I really want to leave the house? My TV's calling my name, the couch looks comfortable, my favorite blanket's right there. On the other hand, this interaction might just be draining. I'm so tired already, right? Like you could think of a million reasons why you shouldn't go. And sometimes we, fall prey to that, and that force wins, and we end up not going. But number one, I think that if people understood the actual significance of interacting for our brain health, then in those moments it wouldn't be such a difficult decision. Because it's like people understand sleep, they understand why it's good for them. People understand diet, people understand exercise. They may not understand the molecular mechanisms, of course. I'm sure most people don't, but people have an awareness that it's 2 a.m, you're scrolling on your phone, you got to get up for work at 8, and it's like, well, if I go to sleep now, I only get 6 hours. I should probably sleep because I know I'm going to feel worse. But I don't think people have that about socializing. I think that we view socializing as like a treat for ourselves, or like it's a leisurely activity. Sleep is not necessarily a leisurely activity. It's something we do for our wellness. Exercise is for our wellness. Eating a healthy diet is for our wellness. But people don't view socializing as a part of the wellness habits. And so I wish people started to view it that way. And so, on the first hand, I'm hoping that maybe people can kind of reframe the way they view interacting. And then on the second hand, I'm hoping people will also understand what I just mentioned, that we genuinely do impose barriers. I'm not speaking about that as like anecdotally as a human, although I can relate to that. I'm speaking about that as a scientist, that there's a ton of research showing that basically humans miscalculate like a ton of different stuff when it comes to interaction. We expect that people are going to reject us if we try to have a conversation with them. We expect that if we give someone a compliment, that they're going to think it's weird. We expect that if we stay in conversation longer, the conversation is just going to continuously get worse. And we also underestimate our social abilities. People think that they're pretty bad at socializing when they're actually not. We think people like us less than they really do. Like, there are all of these reasons why we are anxious about socializing, and that often translates to, I'm just going to sit on the couch and not go out. And so on the second point, I'm hoping that people might start to think or people might start to understand that it's normal to feel that way, and that like all human beings feel this way. These are like scientifically documented phenomena that you will think, yeah, you know what, if I go out and hang out with these people tonight, I'm probably not going to feel good. But like, that's statistically more likely than not to feel that way. But in reality, when you do go and you interact with people, you feel a lot better afterwards. So, I mean, the answer is socializing more. I think we also, gosh, I just have so much to say on this. I mean, this entire rest of this podcast,
We got time.
I could just go on and on about this topic, but
And I want to say, like, what you are bringing up is the neurodivergent experience, and what so many people with like ADHD, OCD, autism like experience. But what I'm hearing from you is the research is like every brain experiences this.
Yeah. I mean, we care about where we fall in our social environments a lot, right? And some people care a lot more. Some people experience like genuine diagnosable social anxiety, but we all experience some level of anxiety about, are people going to like us? And, again, I hate to harp too much on the evolutionary perspective, but this is just the way I view the world. I think that you can find a lot of explanations for things by looking back a long time ago, what life was like when our brains evolved. And in an ancient world, being well-liked and being accepted by your group was super important, because if you failed to do that, and if you were super obnoxious and unlikable and everybody hated you, they might feed you to the predators, right? Or let you, not get you food. And it's important to have good standing with your group for your survival. And so it's normal for the human brain to care a lot about what other people think, and to not want to be rejected, and to not, have bad interactions. And what I also think people are kind of aware of is that we've lost a lot of social interaction over the last few years. We have this concept of this loneliness epidemic that the U.S. Surgeon General announced a couple of years ago. And of course, we all went through COVID and dealt with that and how that felt. But I think what we may not be recognizing is that we've lost a lot of these like micro interactions in our lives. There are so many places where human contact is being replaced with convenient automation. There's pretty much anything, like name any task, you can now do it on your phone, whether that's, touring a house that you would normally go and talk to the real estate agent. You can just look through it on Zillow.
Mm-hmm.
You want to order groceries through Instacart instead of going to the store and looking around and talking to people and talking to the cashier. I mean, going to the bank, you call the bank, it's a robot. You go to the bank, it's an ATM. There's just so many places where we used to get this like tiny little bits of sort of community reassurance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you go to the grocery store and you're cashing out and you have a really nice 1-minute interaction with the cashier and you walk out and you're like, wow, that person was really nice. That may seem insignificant, but it's not, because that interaction just did something to your brain. It made you feel better, right? It was a good little exercise for your brain, but also that interaction reassured your sort of place in your community. And it gave your brain that pleasant little hit of, these people around you are safe and friendly and are allies. And that's also really pleasant for the brain. And when we replace that constantly with social media and apps and all these things, and then the content that we're consuming on social media is often the worst of humanity, what happens to our sense of belonging, right?
Mm-hmm.
And our sense of community. And I don't know, I mean, as a person who uses social media often as a content creator making videos about neuroscience, I'm not a fan of social media. And I hate when I'm scrolling and, I see a video of something terrible, right? Like a Karen experience or, something like that, where someone's treating someone else like shit, pardon my language. And then you see another video that's like, oh my gosh, like look at these two making up, it's like supposed to be, there's a term for that. Like, it's like love core or something, like, I don't know. There's like a term for like,
there's all kinds of terms. And I have to say, I'm at an age where I'm no longer cool, that I do not know all these terms.
Me neither. But there's a word for this, for like positive content that makes you feel good.
Yeah.
And like 9
Oh, like puppy core.
Yeah, like something like that. But like with humans, and like 9 times out of 10, I watch the video, I'm like, this is 100% fake.
Yeah.
Like these are actors, and I know they're actors, and it makes me feel even more pissed off at humankind, because it's like, what have we done that the content we scroll and watch is people pretending to be nice to each other for financial gain because they can get more followers and views on social media, and we're farming kind interactions for the purpose of entertaining others on their phone. It's like, it's so dystopian where we are currently at, and oh gosh, I don't know, it makes me upset. It all makes me very upset.
Well, we're going to get into more social media stuff. I want to ask you, we're going to play 2 truths and a lie with the audience. So I'm going to give you 3 statements, and then we'll let everybody go to YouTube, guess in the comments which one you think is a lie, and we'll give them some time to answer. We'll come back and do a reveal. So number 1 is, having strong friendships can lower your risk of early death more than exercise. Number 2 is, online friendships affect the brain the same way as in-person ones do. And number 3 is, chronic loneliness raises stress hormones and inflammation. So I think the audience already got some hints on that they can go leave that comment. And what I want to ask you is, while they're doing that, what is something that would shock people to hear about the impact of social isolation on our ability to recover from something like a heart attack?
This question makes me think of a study that in the process of writing my book, which is about this topic, I read so many studies where I was like, first off, I didn't know that, even as a scientist working in this field. And second, that's unbelievable. And one of those studies was looking at cancer patients, and they were looking at colorectal cancer patients, specifically in the US. And they found that patients who were married were 28% less likely to die from cancer. And 28% is a pretty strong number. Well, it's even more impressive when you recognize that that's actually a higher number than the likelihood of surviving from using chemotherapy. So actually, being married was a stronger predictor of survival than chemotherapy. That doesn't mean that chemotherapy doesn't work. Of course, the people who survived and were married, part of the reason they were much more likely to survive is because their partners were encouraging them to get the finest level of care they could, which incorporates chemotherapy. But I think this reveals something else too, because it's not all the chemo. There's something else about being connected. And what a lot of people don't recognize, just like you said, melatonin is an antioxidant. oxytocin is super good for the body. It's actually been called nature's medicine by some researchers because it has all these unbelievable benefits. It's anti-inflammatory, neuroprotective. It can maybe reduce some social stress and anxiety. It is associated with immune function. It can strengthen bones. Actually, bones express oxytocin receptors. Super interesting.
That's awesome. I've never heard that.
Who knew? Right. Yeah.
That's
that was
incredible.
one that I learned.
I'm like, more orgasms for everyone.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so, right, like when you think about, sex, sexual contact, oxytocin goes up for sure. But just in general, there are certain relationships in life that are characterized by higher levels of oxytocin, and they are romantic partnerships and parent-child bonds.
Mm-hmm.
So,
what about pet bonds?
Those also trigger oxytocin, but those two I just mentioned are they're like a level above.
Okay, so there's like the big boost, like the big hit. But,
yeah.
And my little dog cuddling me, that's like a little hit.
Yeah. I don't think anyone's ever directly compared those to quantifiably say, but yeah,
I'm going to measure my blood, cuddle my husband, cuddle my dog, cuddle my kids. What happens?
That would be pretty interesting. And cuddle a friend too, right? Throw a friendship in there. And yeah, because, it's really important to be bound familially, right? Like oxytocin it's like, I call it social glue, right? People think of it as a love hormone and all this, but to explain something I mentioned at the very beginning, oxytocin's the big domino, knocks over serotonin and dopamine. So that 3-part system is what drives social reward. Mm-hmm. It's what makes us feel good. What makes us want to come back for more interactions. And so if in this interaction, my brain and body are releasing tons of oxytocin, it's going to be rewarding. It's going to tell me this interaction, this person is super, super rewarding, makes me feel great. I want to spend more time with this person. That's why when you're falling in love in the early stages, like all you want to do is hang out with that person. And when you have a child, all you want to do is be near that child. But you don't really get that necessarily for friends, right? Like it feels good to be around them, but you're not like obsessed with their presence. Mm-hmm. And so, the brain, when you're releasing all that oxytocin, is telling you being around this person is productive. It's rewarding. It's like finding that field of vegetables, right? That's going to like keep you alive. And so when we're in position to mate and sorry, that's so like scientific sounding.
It's a very scientific way to put it, but that's okay. Our audience can hang.
And I'm thinking of it as like a evolutionary perspective, right? Like when you find a romantic partner and you have the potential to reproduce, also a scientific term, but you can have kids. That's like the best thing possible. That evolution loves that, right? The thing that we are all here on Earth to do through the eyes of evolution is to survive and reproduce so that our species stays here. So when you meet someone that you love and you can make children, then that oxytocin keeps you super healthy so you can make children. And then when the child gets here, that oxytocin, that nature's medicine, keeps you super healthy so that you can successfully raise the child and allow them to survive. And so when you think about the cancer patients who are more likely to survive if they had a romantic partner or if they were married, kind of makes sense. It's like there's all these benefits of oxytocin circulating. And, not just in the context of cancer, but for the average person. There's a reason why isolated people, sorry, this is going to sound really dramatic and scary, but certain studies have shown with like 300,000 people, a good number, that people who are super isolated are 50% more likely to die by any cause.
That's huge.
That doesn't mean that like, if you take 2 people, like this person's going to die this year, right? Like it's tracking over the course of time, over the course of like a decade, that study was, and looking at all different causes of death. But it makes sense if you have this amazing sort of healing hormone circulating in your body at all times, or if you don't, you're going to be much less vulnerable to things like heart attacks if you do have that circulating. And so the presence of people we love is a very important thing when it comes to longevity and just maintaining a healthy body.
I want to get to the 2 truths and a lie, but something that came up when you talked about the cancer study, the question for me is, did they look at genders? So you said being married is important, but I'm wondering, have there been any studies that looks at like if the male partner, so speaking in a heterosexual couple, the male partner gets cancer, they're more likely to survive if they have a wife. Is it the same when you flip it, when it's reversed? Or have they even looked at that?
That's a good question. I don't remember them looking at that. The one study that you just made me think of, there is a chance that men are more vulnerable to the health effects of isolation, specifically in older people. The study I'm thinking of is people over 65. They were looking at the sort of mortality risk of isolation. Same thing. Is being isolated going to make you more likely to die?
Yeah.
And it is. It's especially bad in older people. And in men, it increased the risk, being isolated, increased the risk of death by 78%.
Mm-hmm.
And in women, it was only 57%.
Yeah.
So slightly different angle, but there probably are sex differences in terms of how we react to isolation. And another really important point, too, is that one thing I'm worried about when I talk about this is that people are going to hear this message and they're going to just be like, okay, well, I'm going to socialize 100% of the time. I'm going to always surround myself with people every night after work. I'm going to see friends, even to the point of exhaustion. But that's not really the right way to go about it. It's important for everyone to understand that we are all different. We all exist somewhere on this continuum from being really introverted to being super extroverted. And depending on where you fall on that continuum, your like social needs will be different. And so oversaturating yourself with interaction is not necessarily a good approach or a healthy approach.
Mm-hmm.
If you top out, when you reach that point where it's too much and you really just want to be alone, that's perfectly fine to be alone. There's nothing wrong with that. So, when we're talking about like sex differences and, I'm thinking about individual differences because it would be wrong to say that we should all maximize our interaction for the sake of our well-being, because we all kind of have different sized social batteries.
I think about this in the context of like, you don't overcharge devices because then the battery burns out faster. So
Yeah.
top up, reach your point and don't feel like you need to overdo it. So let me ask you, we're going to go true or false on these 2 truths and a lie. So true or false, having strong friendships can lower your risk of early death more than exercise alone.
I wouldn't be surprised if that one's true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think like the point of this one is really for people to understand is that health is a holistic endeavor. Often we think if I just control my diet, if I just exercise, but the community component, it has equal weight in terms of I think you've presented so far enough studies that I'm like sitting here being like, hang out with friends, even when you don't want to at all, just being neurodivergent. I'm the person that's like, I say yes to an invite. And then it comes to the time and I'll sometimes even drive there. I'll park and I'll be like, I ain't got it in me. I gotta go. I gotta go. And I've had friends that are like, I saw you outside my house. I'm like,
no.
I know, but like I just, and before I figured out that I was autistic, before I got diagnosed, I'm like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I just don't like have the energy to like have a conversation. I don't know what's going on. And then I'm like, oh, masking, check. Okay. So number 2 is online friendships affect the brain the same way in-person ones do.
That one's got to be false. Well,
you talked about it in your book.
Well, you came up with these points. That one's definitely false. Let's go.
That's the tricky thing is that there's like what you said and how you said it in your book. And then there's how I ask it. I think we're like having our own little neuroscience experiment right now. Right. Okay, number 3, chronic loneliness raises stress hormones and inflammation.
True. That is the one that that was the hint earlier that we already discussed.
Okay, so let me ask you this, though, because we did talk about social media earlier. What do you think social media, in the current way it is showing us divisive content, trying to rage bait us and pitting us against other humans, is actually doing to our brain and our ability to form meaningful relationships? Because what happens on Instagram doesn't stay on Instagram.
Yeah. I mean, there's no question that social media is not social. It incorporates social elements, right? Of course, we are seeing content. Like I'm thinking about the Instagram feed scrolling experience. You're seeing someone posted a picture. Look, they're in Greece. They're with their mom or whatever. They got married. They bought a house. Like it's social. You're taking in social information. But it is in no way comparable to a real life social experience, social interaction. And the data suggests that is true. When you look at the mood benefits of, well, not even social media, but just online interactions. So if you actually have a real interaction where you're FaceTiming with someone or you're phone calling or you're texting with them, not just scrolling on social media, people don't feel as good after those virtual interactions compared to in-person interactions. And for me, the reasoning seems very clear. I mean, we are interacting face to face right now, which is awesome. I love doing in-person podcasts. It's a rare thing, but we have all these cues that we can detect, and your facial expression, your body language, your vocal tone, that those cues are going into my brain. I'm not thinking about it. My brain's just a computer that does this. It's just processing and computing an assessment of your mood and your feelings and your reaction to what I just said, and whether you're kind of done with this topic and ready for the next thing, you're getting a little bored, right? Like there's all this information that's going in here and just happening, and your social cues are what's doing that. So when we go to even a video call, for instance, we could be doing this through a screen. There, we would lose two things. We would lose social smells, which we don't detect anything. Probably, I don't know, maybe there's some social smells going on here, but it might not be doing
there
that much.
definitely is. I mean, even if like the olfactory center is not like, you're smelling, I'm still detecting you, you're still detecting me. I mean,
Right.
that is to go back to the evolutionary, what I think is interesting is that they've done studies on like when women are ovulating, when they're not ovulating, when they're in menopause, when they're on birth control pill. And we see that there are different interactions. And on the flip side, where women's hormones are at are also dictating who we're perceiving as who we want in our environment. And this isn't just what we see. I don't know if you're familiar with the research on like women picking up like the whole pheromone thing being more about MHC complexes and compatibility. And like, I'm reading your immune system right now. And I think that, there's the social cues of being sick, right? But there's also the like, I got to detect that because you'd be a threat, right?
True. Yeah. That's maybe an olfactory thing. It might be something you smell. But the other thing we lose in video interaction is eye contact, right?
Mhm.
It becomes impossible because you would have to both be looking at your camera and then you're not looking at each other. So you lose eye
Yeah.
contact, which is important. The studies show that, not to go on a whole tangent, but eye contact is an important trigger for interbrain synchrony when two brains synchronize. And
let me just say, I've had this weekend 3 sexperts, okay, like psychologists who specialize in human sexuality, who have all said eye contact is one of the most important things that couples are missing out on. So you saying that, like, I'm like, oh, you just like made this huge connection for our audience.
yeah, no, I mean, because interbrain synchrony, I don't want to, this could be like a 20-minute diversion. I'll make it 30 seconds. When people are working together, on the same wavelength, right? Thinking kind of the same things, certain brain areas can synchronize. And it's not like there's some like quantum leap where like our brains are like,
we're not telepathic.
No, it's not
miraculously.
That. Right. It's that we are just we're just on the same page, right? We are thinking the same things. We understand the situation from the same way. At least that's my take. I mean, there might be neuroscientists out there who think it's some sort of quantum thing. I don't. There's probably a few that think that way. Anyways, that's important because people actually, there's studies showing that when people are experiencing interbrain synchrony, it improves cooperation in certain ways on certain tasks. And romantic couples are at a higher likelihood of experiencing interbrain synchrony, and specifically during eye contact. So it is an important thing. And so, when you think about long-term couples that you're FaceTiming and maybe you're more likely to get in an argument or something like that, right? We're distancing, we're losing some of the social texture for our brains.
Yeah.
And so, you can imagine what happens as we go down this like pyramid of digital interactions. You go from video call to phone call. Okay, now you can't see any body language. You can't see any facial expressions. You're losing more of that our brains are just soaking in and using to form an understanding of each other. Without that, what happens? Well, you struggle to understand each other. And why would my brain perceive that I'm interacting with a human being when all of the typical cues that tell my brain this is a human, pay attention to their emotions, are not there? And so I have a theory on this, or hypothesis. I call it the virtual disengagement hypothesis. In other words, when we interact virtually or digitally, I believe the brain areas that drive empathy disengage, because typically
well, that explains so much social media behavior.
exactly, because typically what happens when we perceive vocal tone and all that stuff I mentioned, that it kind of just goes in and my brain just picks it up, right? That's empathy. So the brain has empathy systems that they turn on when this social information is detected, and it helps you understand what someone's thinking. On social media, we don't have those cues, and so we may not empathize as much. And empathy at its core is defined as the sharing of someone else's experience, right? You take on their emotions. So, if I were to step on your toes right now and you were to be hurt by that, I would feel bad because your pain hurts me because of empathy, right? I take on some of that negative experience. But if I comment something really mean on your social media, and you might have the same sort of painful response. I'm not there to witness it. I don't experience your social cues. So my brain is completely free to go. Right. I can just move on with my life without feeling bad at all. And so I use this analogy in the book about placing a tack, right? You place a tack as a kindergartner trying to prank a friend, and then you move on, and now years later, a child just sat on the tack in your childhood elementary school, and they're crying and they're in the nurse's office. Do you feel empathy, right? It's kind of like, does a tree that falls in the woods up by itself make a sound? How can you feel empathy when you are not witnessing the cues? You are directly responsible for that child's pain, but you're not aware of it. And so on social media, we are not present for the moment where the whoever posted steps on the tack. We just don't witness it. And so I think that is a big driver behind our hostility. And what I particularly worry about is empathy is something that we largely learn through experience, through childhood. And in the modern world, where kids are interacting more and more online in their early life, I worry about what happens to a brain when the key social moments where you learn about empathy are happening in digital environments, where our brains are potentially behaving differently. Would a person in that environment still develop empathy the same way? And I worry that it may not. And so, when it comes to what's the net effect of social media, I mean, I think it's destroying our attention. This is sort of like one of those social media things where it's like people say it on social media. Like, I actually agree. And anecdotally, it's like even myself. I mean, I have felt my attention span shrink, which is really sad because it used to be stronger. But we are all just, there are so many forms of entertainment constantly competing for our attention. And it's like anything in life, right? Like, I remember learning in high school or college that when you're in a relationship, what's the most likely thing to break up a relationship? It's a strong alternative, right? So if you meet someone you really like, that's a major threat to your relationship because you have something else. Like, that's pretty much what we're experiencing on social media all the time. You're watching a video that you like and you're enjoying it, but then you're thinking, oh, the next video on my feed might be something even better. And then that impulse grows stronger and stronger. And like, I've actually experienced this where I'm enjoying what I'm watching, and I want to watch the end of it. I'm like, nah, I'm going to see what's next. And then I just kind of move on. And like, I don't think that's good.
It also is changing people's behavior overall, because the way the algorithm is conditioning people to capture attention, to continue to entertain, to shock. And I think about that, and I think about how we're going to look back at these. I think a lot about doctors who do takedown content, who are like, this stupid influencer is a scammer and a grifter, and this is why we hate them kind of content. I think that's one, it's really solidifying not to trust doctors, and that we are egotistical assholes. I think it's like, how do we rebuild trust when you behave so poorly? I have just, within my own house, I have 2 boys. I have to raise them to be men that people want to be in relationship with. And I'm always talking about kindness. So for me, I'm like, I can't go on social media that lives forever and be a contradiction to what I'm teaching my children. My son is the only kid in his class who's not on social media. Wow. And he tells me that. He's like, I'm the only one that doesn't have social media. And the first time he asked me why, I was like, because I love you. And I was like, that's not to say that their parents don't love them. I just can't know what I know and be okay with you being on social media. It's always going to be there, but also you and I, similar ages, how much stuff are you so glad was never documented? Like, I mean, I was like a first user of Facebook because they opened it up to college students, but we just like poked each other. I still don't get that. Decades later, but it was how we formed study groups. That's what we used Facebook for. But I look back to like the college experience and stuff, and like how much stupid stuff I saw at parties, but nobody had a cell phone. Nobody was documenting anything. So I also think about that aspect. But back to my point about like the doctors and the takedown content and all that, I think we're going to look back and be in 20 years and be like, that was really bad. We should have never done that. We should have never, that was very toxic for like human brains altogether. Before we started recording, we were talking about like people's selfishly being kind because it's good for them, selfishly seeking relationships. And it's something that as you're talking about social media, when I get hateful comments, I often will go and be like, I'm leaving 10 positive comments for someone else. Or if I see someone, there was this pregnant woman on TikTok who was just getting hated on in the comments for this dress she wore. I would never wear this dress because I don't have her confidence. But seeing all of that, I was like, I am so glad you are so confident in your pride. I left this comment that was positive, and then the way people pounced on me, and I was like, whoa, in some ways, I just like took the heat away from her because I was like, you're affecting a fetus, okay? You're affecting a baby in the future.
Yeah,
but
right.
it's all to say that like, I will, when I'm like, oh, that comment hurt, I'm like, okay, what will make me feel better? I'm gonna, like, I see a chef who made a good plate, and I'm like, I'm so like proud of you for like trying this, or like, thank you for sharing this with me. Like, and I will go and do that. Like, I'm going to just leave 10 positive comments. And I'm like, then I feel so much better. So let's talk about that. Like the selfishness of like, I'm going to be positive. I'm going to put out positivity because it makes me feel better. Are we just being selfish jerks out there, or are we having a positive impact?
Well, first, let me just comment on the video you're talking about with the pregnant woman.
You know this video?
I don't know the video.
Oh, okay,
but
okay.
it's I just want to draw back to it because it's such a good example of this. Like, if you were walking on the street and you saw this woman or anybody who commented on the video something mean, if they saw that pregnant woman on the street, they would never, even if they met her and were talking with her, they would absolutely never be like, that dress looks terrible on you. You should be ashamed for wearing it, or whatever people said in the comments.
Yeah.
That would never, ever happen because of empathy, because we know that it's going to hurt the person. But on social media, we just have this distance. And so it's like, I don't know. It's like this carelessness. Like, you just, like, your consciousness just goes away, and you are just so much more prone to leaving comments like that. And it's horrific. I mean, like you said, it's affecting a fetus. That's so terrible. But I think that's a good example of it. Okay, so as for the kindness and the positivity, I mean, yeah,
Selfishly kind.
yeah. Well, so people do feel better when they are nice. Actually, when you give people compliments, when you express gratitude, things like that, those are natural mood boosters. They make us feel better. And I do have this belief that in a world where we are feeling more and more divided from each other for so many reasons, not just like physically divided and social media getting between us and all this stuff, but also, I mean, politically divided. And, there's so many reasons why we are separating from each other. I think that if people can understand that being nice to someone is actually good for you, then maybe it gets around those divides and those barriers that we've placed between each other. Because, this concept I also bring up in the book, I call it selflessness. Is that controversial? I don't know. I mean, maybe in certain instances, that's what is needed to sort of get the job done, right? But I think another related concept to this is that we often do look at what makes us different. The brain has a tendency to focus on that, and once it detects that there's something different about someone, the brain starts to treat that person differently, much more negatively. The main thing is, again, this comes back to empathy. Those empathy systems, they rev up a lot more when we detect that someone is like us. And, it happens to me all the time where I'm passing someone, and, like, I'm from Buffalo, New York. If I see someone in a Bills sweater or something, I immediately just I like them more.
Oh, I was like, is he not a Bills fan? Is he a Bills fan?
Yeah.
People are going to be commenting, being like, I hate the Bills.
Yeah, I'm gonna have some angry Jets and Dolphins and Patriots fans. But yeah, there's something about it where you just snap into this respect for someone when you see that they're like you. And then on the other hand, I mean, how does it feel when you see someone who's unlike you? I mean, all over the country, we have people outside protesting and rallying. And, how does it feel when you drive past people rallying for a cause that you don't believe in? A lot of the time, these outdoor rallies and stuff are political, right? So if you didn't vote for Donald Trump and you see people out there waving around Trump flags, the distance that you feel from those people is real. The brain treats them differently, and vice versa. If you voted for Trump and you see people waving, Kamala Harris flags or whatever, if anyone would be doing that at this point. But that's, to me, concerning, because I think we've gotten really, really good at identifying all the various ways that we can be different from someone. It didn't used to be as salient, that we didn't pay as close attention to all the ways that we are different. But I think right now we have this, and social media is actually feeding this a lot, where we're building this culture around identity, where, what is your gender identity? What is your sexuality? What is your religion? What is your political identity? There are so many ways that these very personal things are being pulled to the surface of someone's identity. And that's often also what's underlying the hostility and criticism and harassment and all that terrible shit that's happening on social media. Is that person's different from me.
Yeah.
I disagree with your beliefs. And so I'm going to let you have it, especially because my brain's basically turned off right now while I'm attacking you on social media. And so what I really want people to think about is what that does to the brain. We're talking about isolation. We're talking about the negative health effects of not being connected. What happens to your brain when you are living in a world where you perceive that you're surrounded by enemies, right? That's a very bad thing. And also what happens to your interactions when your empathy systems are turning off, because the first thing you're thinking about when you see your uncle is that they voted for the other political candidate. And so you're different. And so you don't respect them the same. And I just want people to get back to, what do we have in common, right? And that may seem like such a ridiculous request at this point, but it's a really good starting point, because, there's so many ways to do it. You can go to meetup events where, let's say you love mountain biking. You can find groups who are mountain bikers, and you can go, and that particular example is going to draw all sorts of different people from all sorts of different backgrounds, and you will share something in common, that you all love mountain biking and that you're all mountain biking together. And it gives you something to pull to the surface over those other identity measures. And I think if we, especially in the US, if we really want to climb out of this, these trenches of isolation that we find ourselves in, I think we're going to have to sort of shake off some of the importance of identity and allow us to just recognize these other human beings are a lot like me, and being around them is good for my brain.
What's the incentive of the trenches, though? Who's benefiting from it? Because there are definitely people who want to keep us divided, who want to make sure that we are distracted, that we are cultivating negative thoughts. Why?
Without going fully conspiratorial,
I don't know, though. It's funny how in 2020, we're going to talk about the pandemic, because I got questions about that, how everything became a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but wait a minute. So many things have some truth to them. We have to explore. And then it's everything is you're this crazy tinfoil hat person if you ask these questions. And it's it's just normal to have questions as a human. And
right.
And so have the conspiracy, have the hypothesis, we'll just call it that, and be and we'll see how it shakes out later, right?
Sure. Yeah, I mentioned that isolation is a form of stress. The other thing is, it's not just stress, there's more to it. And one of the ways that isolation affects the brain is it alters social information processing. There's literally, studies that basically when people are isolated, they show different brain responses to social information. So for instance, people who are more isolated, when they see negative social images, like in the study I'm thinking of, one of the images they used was a man slapping a woman. Isolated people show larger brain responses in certain brain areas, like the visual cortex. Does that mean they are showing hyper responsiveness to negative social information? Maybe so. Evolutionarily, that makes a bit of sense, that when you're cast out from your tribe and then you enter a new tribe and you're exposed to more social information, you should be paying close attention to your environment, and you should be a bit skeptical, right? Because if you find a new tribe and they welcome you in, well, can you really trust these people? And so in that same vein, there's also evidence that isolated people struggle with trust. They are less likely to trust others. They're also less likely to be trusted by others. And so if you think about when people are isolated, they struggle with trust. Okay. They also pay closer attention to negative social information. Interesting. That person is extremely vulnerable to conspiracy, actually, right? Because
as we present a conspiracy.
right. I mean, yeah, and whether there is a, I don't necessarily believe that there is a they, right? Like, I think
I'm gonna jump in here. I 100% believe that the major media sources want to keep us in this loop of being addicted to negative content. And we see this by evidence of what does the news present? What will Meta tee up for you? We know that if you're a male, you open up a new social media account, YouTube, TikTok, Meta, you name it, they're going to show you like very polarizing negative things. So there is definitely, and so everybody listening, they might be jumping to like, oh, so she must think like something. Let me be clear what I think. I think it's advertising dollars.
Yeah.
I think it's if you can captivate and hold attention and you've got, look at food science. Okay, so my degree, food science and nutrition, we figured out what your neurochemistry is and how to manipulate food to hijack your natural inclinations. Social media has done the same thing. Media as a whole has done the same thing with our neurochemistry of like hijacking us. And it is all because more eyes is more dollars. And so that's my conspiracy, you guys, is that it's about advertising dollars. It's about generating money. I'm sure some people are going to be like, this is political manipulation or this or that. Maybe. I don't know. I haven't put much thought into that, but I think it's more about like, if I can keep you addicted and keep you here, I can show you more ads and I make more money.
No, I agree. And that's the direction I was headed, because
sorry, then I shouldn't have cut you off.
No. I'm glad you said it. Now
you're like, she can take the heat.
I could simply endorse. No, but I mean, because that's where I was going. What I was starting to say is I don't think there's a they, right? Like, because you can go real deep into this where it's like, wow, well, like, did mainstream American media start the COVID pandemic? Like, no. But when conditions change and we end up in certain circumstances, capitalism is going to capitalism, right? Like,
yeah.
if we are isolated and suddenly, like during the COVID pandemic, we are now more likely to struggle with trust. And so we're going to be more focused maybe on stories that reaffirm our distrust of certain institutions. We are paying closer attention to negative social signals. Suddenly the news starts playing more negative information because they recognize, hey, when we do this, our viewership goes up. And so we can, charge more for ad slots, right? Like, I think that there's a very coincidental, circumstantial shift that was probably triggered by COVID, where like, because we were so isolated, we started to process information differently. And so, yeah, like the news just followed the money. And now here we are years later, still in this shit stew of whatever the hell this is, and a couple months ago, there was the whole thing where Donald Trump said something about transgender mice.
Oh, yeah, the transgenic mice. But yes. And which is a good example of like why scientists need to be collaborating with everyone, because that like one word can be very confusing. So I want you to make your point, but I think we also should explain people what the difference is.
Right. Yeah. So transgenic mice. So like, in my research, I've used transgenic mice. You're altering the genome of mice. Like, for example, in my research, we were looking at genetic risk factors for autism. And so we would, there are certain genes that, genetic changes that are associated with autism in humans. We want to study how those genes are affecting brain function. So we would introduce those specific changes into the genomes of mice. We're changing their genome, genic. So those are transgenic mice. And so whatever. So there's a quote where Donald Trump said something about, oh, they're making the mice transgender. I think he meant transgenic. Maybe he didn't. But anyways, I saw that and it upset me because I thought, my God, like you said, we need more scientists communicating with political leaders to make sure that they understand what's going on. But then what also upset me was then I saw a video going super viral on TikTok, I think it was, where someone was correcting and they were like, Donald Trump is so stupid. He said transgender. He meant transgenic. This is what transgenic mice are. And then the guy in the video explained completely wrong.
Oh, was that the video where he was like, they're injecting human DNA?
I can't remember the exact explanation, but it was completely wrong. And what upset me was that people were going wild, rallying in the comments, being like, share this, everyone share this. We need to make sure that everyone knows like the truth. And it's like, this is not the truth.
Yeah.
And what frustrated me about that was that for people who oppose Donald Trump, that video was such a satisfying slap in the face to Donald Trump that it didn't even matter if the information was valid or not.
What does that say about like our neurochemistry and bias?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. There's nothing more satisfying than seeing the opposition be defeated, right? And what frustrates me is that we are allowing our in-group, out-group dynamics to become more important than the quality of information. And there's this problem in America that's been happening for years that's been referred to as truth decay, right? We are losing a sense of truth, right? Anything can be labeled as misinformation, fake news. We are losing a sense of what is reality. News outlets can report whatever they want and then be cited as a reference when the actual information is wrong in the news outlet. It's concerning. And I think that, this is just my opinion, but I think evidence should be our primary guide. And you may be more likely to trust evidence when it comes from someone who you share opinions with, but the in-group identity of someone does not necessarily make them a trustworthy source of information. The fundamental reality of what happened and what information is true is different depending on your political lean. And that to me is just like the scariest thing in the universe. It is so concerning.
Yeah. I think it's also concerning that when someone doesn't understand something that is complex science, how quick people are to say, you're stupid. Let me say, people who are truly smart don't tend to have to step on someone else to demonstrate their intelligence. But when you see that, I'm always like, this is why people are afraid to ask questions. This is why people are afraid to have statements. We all have our level of expertise. I can sit here with you. I have probably already said something dumb, and I'm going to say something dumb again in the context of if I'm held to the standard to have the same level of knowledge as you. But I think that's a really slippery slope. You brought up, though, listening to experts. You are an expert in autism. You have done research in this arena. We have seen this go so political, and I see there is no left or right and everybody's getting so much wrong in so many ways. What do you think are some of the big things that people are getting wrong, especially when it comes to the cause of autism?
In the year 1998, a scientist named Andrew Wakefield published a study, and the study said that the MMR vaccine increased the risk of autism. And it was in there was 14, I think, patients. It was maybe 17. It was small. And this study hit the news, and everybody was like, uh-oh, yikes, vaccines, autism. And then what ended up happening quietly in the background was it turned out Andrew Wakefield was involved in a lawsuit against a pharmaceutical company. And so he had fabricated the data to use in court. So it was made up data. And the thing that crushes me about this is nowadays we have so many people who are you can't trust any science because all science is funded by pharmaceutical companies. First off, that's completely not true. I've published 20 plus papers, worked with hundreds of researchers. I've never heard of anybody having a research study funded by a big pharma company. Never. Sure, it can happen. I've never heard of it actually happening. But the people who say that, they're like, you can't trust that study because there's a conflict of interest. They're funded by big pharma. And then oftentimes people with that opinion will also believe that vaccines are associated with autism.
Well, they believe vaccines cause autism,
yes, yeah.
Right? That it's a direct cause.
Right. And the irony about that is that the original paper that suggested, and by the way, the only paper that suggested that vaccines cause autism had a conflict of interest because he was embroiled in an lawsuit against the vaccine company. And so he fabricated the data because he had an incentive to do it. And so it's the exact same issue with saying, you could say the studies that say vaccines are safe are funded by big pharma, so you can't trust them. Well, the studies that say vaccines cause autism were trying to oppose big pharma companies. Anyways, so the paper was retracted, the one that was published in 1998. And ever since then, people have believed that vaccines cause autism. Naturally, this has triggered scientists to say, well, we should probably check, right? And so there are studies with millions of children comparing vaccination status with likelihood of autism diagnosis, and there's no relationship. So it has been shown time and time again with massive sample sizes that there's no link between vaccines and autism. And yet it's continuously a topic, right? We have, this is very much a political topic now. But I mean, that's, again, I allowed the data to lead me, and the data say that there are no links between those two things. When it comes to the actual causes of autism, genetics is a major component. There's estimates are all over the place, but let's say, to be fair, maybe like 40 to 60% of autism cases are related to genetics. And that was the basis of my PhD, was studying specific genetic changes and how they influence brain function, the activity in social related brain areas. Then there are environmental factors. That is a real thing, which can be, things like maternal stress during pregnancy, maternal sickness during pregnancy,
Inflammation, obesity. Yeah.
age, exposure to environmental toxins in utero, like pollution and things like that, or like diesel gas, like things like that. And then there are certain drugs like valproic acid, VPA. So in utero is associated with autism. And what's interesting, by the way, is that when scientists want to study autism in mice, there are ways that basically we'll try to induce autism in a mouse. And, it's not autism, but they show similar changes. They're less social and things like that. And some of the ways that happens is, one model is called maternal immune activation. So they're triggering an immune response in the mother while pregnant. Another is valproic acid exposure, so exposure to VPA while in utero. And then the others are mostly genetic. And then lastly, there are also what's called idiopathic cases, which are basically we don't know what's going on. And that's usually where people will say, well, that's probably where the vaccines come in. But, again, and truly, I hate to have this conversation after having just had a political conversation, because it's impossible for a listener to say, this guy's totally neutral. I try to be, but the data say that there's not a role for vaccines. So
I'm gonna tell you, like, straight up, as somebody who just sold another book, that I met with publishing houses who literally said to me on the call, you cannot talk about anything political if you were to work with us. And I asked them, well, how? Because I'm in health. I work in women's health. I didn't choose to be political. Politics chose us. And we're just in the ring, and I'm just like trying to help people sort through this. So, going back to what you said, we saw recently announced that acetaminophen, cause of autism. And I want to ask you, because you're the expert in this arena.
So there's another variable, which is maybe the health of the mother, lurking in the background, that is associated with both increased risk of using acetaminophen and increased risk of child having autism. And there's another study that came out a couple months ago that was just like this terrible garbage study that was produced by these scientists who are like very clearly desperate to find evidence that vaccines cause autism. Like they lead this organization that's all about vaccines and autism. The paper's been retracted like multiple times, and like they've been trying to publish it forever, but they finally got it published on a website that is like meant to look like a scientific journal, but it's actually just this guy's website. And it was peer reviewed by the editor of the journal, who's also in the organization that they run. Anyways.
So you want to talk about conspiracy? When people are like, this is funded by pharma, I think every piece of science that comes out, like, we have to sit through the lens of like what it's really lame too, right? For science to be like that, where we have to be like, okay, who are the players? Who are the players? Especially when it is flying in the face of like years of data.
Exactly. When something comes out that makes no sense, the initial response should be to call bullshit. If it goes against the existing data, yeah.
But we have to be cautious, right? Because hand washing was once upon a time bullshit, and we institutionalized that guy. So I will say, like, things do change.
Yeah, absolutely. They do change. Yeah, I think it depends on the context. Anyway, so this study that I'm talking about, they basically found that people who went for more vaccines were way more likely to have autism. And again, that's like, holy cow, 117 times, like, definitely not vaccinating my kids. Okay, hit the brakes. What is the confounding variable in this case? Well,
more doctor's visits,
exactly.
More screenings. Yeah, that's my first thought.
Yeah, if the parents and the children, I guess too, but mostly let's think about the parents, because they're really making the decisions in this case, who are more likely to take their kids for all these doctor visits, which incorporate vaccines, are also much more likely to take their child to the doctor for an autism assessment when their child starts demonstrating some sort of social symptoms. And so, yeah, it's like the thing about that study is it really brings to the light this important dilemma, which is that, like, science, it very much can be political, and it depends on how it's presented. It really does, because you can easily control for other variables there, or you could not, right? And in this case, they did not. And so it creates this bar graph where you look at it and you're like, whoa, right? And this happens all the time on the news too, where there's like funny examples of this on social media where there's a bar graph and it's like, they'll have like number of mass shootings and they'll be like 40, 60, and then like this year, 80. And it's like, why is the difference? It's like, it's also a 20 difference, but it's like massive. And it's just like the way it's presented. And as a scientist, I absolutely hate that people have decided to start basically using data as a way to, manipulate people who pay attention to the news. But it's really concerning. And I also, I empathize with people who are distrustful of science. I understand, science has done a lot wrong, right? It's like the way that science works, that if I were to publish a paper today, I'd publish it in a scientific journal. It'll be behind a paywall. It'll be full of jargon. There's basically no way for the average person to read and understand it. That's a huge problem, right? How can we expect people to respect and listen to science when science is so withdrawn from society? That's a problem.
And on purpose. I think about that journal article that came out, and their whole game was if you put it into like ChatGPT or AI to read it, it's going to give you the wrong stuff. And I'm like, you're jerks. You're absolute jerks. If you're listening, you're a jerk. Because like this was an opportunity to make science accessible. Like I have literally on this podcast told people, take a study, put it into ChatGPT, and first thing say, what are all the flaws and limitations of this study? Now okay, first I'm going to go into it this way. Okay. And then you can start prompting ChatGPT to like, okay, so like what were the findings of this study? What should I read to verify these studies? Like you could use AI to teach yourself how to understand a scientific study.
Yeah.
I mean, it could literally coach you. During the pandemic, I think it was Yale that had a course that they put online of like how to understand science so that they could get more people science literate. AI comes out, people have that opportunity, and then you have this like journal article come out, and I saw people putting it out, these scientists being like, you can't just use AI and see it. I'm like, why would you handicap people from being able to understand science? You want them to trust it. Like, what's your end goal? To be like the expert, the gatekeeper, or to actually make science accessible? I would hope it would be the latter, but like, I don't know. I don't want to play with you because like, you don't play nicely.
Yeah. Well, I think that also raises something that's important, is that scientists are human beings, and all human beings have opinions. All human beings sometimes do things that we disagree with, even people we love, like my parents, like people close to me. I love them to death. They often do things that I'm like, why would you ever do that? Right. And so it's entirely possible that you and I, if we were sitting down with that scientist, we would agree on everything except that one decision. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you say that, because people will think if you disagree with one thing, you hate that person.
Right.
And that is not, I'm like, there is no human on this planet that I agree with 100%. And like, I find confrontation and conflict to actually be a good thing sometimes, because it's what actually challenges me to reframe, rethink, grow my knowledge.
I think that's actually another part of what's sort of happened culturally in the last few years is that exactly what you just said, right? We disagree on one thing, therefore I am not able to permit you in my life whatsoever, and that's actually, that's like fundamentally at the root of what I care about so much, is that if we do that, if we allow ourselves to create distance with other people just because we disagree about something, we're actually doing a major disservice to our health and our biology. And that's a problem.
Let me play devil's advocate here, going back to the vaccine and autism, because there are absolutely parents who are like, I gave my child a vaccine, they were a different person later. Is it plausible that born genetically you are autistic, and at the underpinning of that, there is immune system dysregulation, and that perhaps any immune stimulation, whether it's naturally acquired or it's vaccine acquired, could tip the scale and further the autism expression?
In my mind, not really, because let's think about like why would a genetic mutation or genetic change increase the risk for autism, right? Like, this is literally what I've studied in my PhD.
This is why I'm asking you. And because I know someone's in the comments right now, they've already left the comment on
Yeah,
this.
100%. 100%. I'm sure there's a lot of comments that I won't be excited to read later. I mentioned before that we have 86 billion neurons. They all have 1,000 plus synapses, right? So there's just all this interaction. That the interaction that happens between neurons at those synapses, those junctions, is called synaptic transmission.
Mm-hmm.
And it's we could think of like, you've seen the like textbook image before, right? There's two like ends of a neuron, or two neurons are interacting. There's like the presynapse, the postsynapse, a neurotransmitter floats across and it binds to a receptor, right? Like,
Y'all better be on YouTube right now because he's doing all kinds of hands.
I got my hands on it. Yeah. So, look it up if you're listening, or if you're not listening, if you're viewing too, like just look up a picture of a synapse so you can like remember what I'm talking about. So there's so many players just in a single synapse, right? You have the like actual like membrane, like the outer skin of the cell.
Mm-hmm.
You have the neurotransmitter itself, like dopamine or serotonin. You have the little vessel that carries the neurotransmitter. You have the little proteins that take that vessel and fuse it to the membrane and allow the neurotransmitter to sprinkle out into the space between. On the other side, I mean, gosh, that's not even like a tenth of it on that one side. On the other side, you have all these receptors. You have all these intracellular messengers where the receptor activates and then maybe there's some downstream cascade. It's really complicated and there's all sorts of players, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there are a few different sort of explanations for what's happening in the brain in autism.
Mm-hmm.
But one that is very prominent and that I personally think is a key player is this idea of excitation, inhibition, imbalance. And what that means is sometimes those signals between neurons are excitatory, which means that they turn up the activity of the receiving neuron. So one neuron is telling another neuron become more active, or it's the other way. They're saying become less active. That's inhibitory. There's a delicate balance between those plus sign and minus sign signals. And if you have a sort of imbalance, whether that's too much activity or too little activity, specifically in certain brain areas like the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in social cognition and understanding what people are thinking,
Mm-hmm.
if you have an imbalance in that activity in either direction, it can alter basically social interactions and the way people process social information. And so this is thought to be one of the potential like sort of causes, like brain causes of autism. So, sorry, I mentioned this is like a huge topic. I'm trying to explain all of it. So,
I know. I'm like, do it in 30 seconds or less.
yeah,
No,
my head
I'm
will
just kidding.
explode. So I'm almost there though. So, okay, genetically, right? How can we get there to an imbalance? Well, it's probably because one of the genes that codes for any of those proteins I mentioned, right? So we have the vesicle, we have the neurotransmitter, we have the receptor, we have all these different things. One of those genes may have changed spontaneously when the baby was, a pack of 20 cells before it continued growing and became a human being.
Mm-hmm.
There was just a random genetic error because every time a cell divides, it needs to take all these, I don't remember, 30,000 genes that humans have. That's something I should know. Sorry. Hey, nobody's perfect. However many thousands of genes we have, the cell has to copy and replicate all of those genes. So imagine if you had to sit down with a pencil and copy all 30,000 genes, how many errors would you make? You'd probably make a few.
Mm-hmm.
Every single time the cell has to do that when it divides. So errors happen randomly. If the error is, let's say, in the gene that codes for the receptor that takes in the neurotransmitter, and that receptor normally, when the neurotransmitter binds to it, it makes the cell more active. That neurotransmitter is now broken in some way. There's something wrong with the code. The protein is like misfolded, and so it's not causing the cell to be activated.
Mm-hmm.
That can lead to this imbalance, right? And that would probably lead to the lower end where the cells are less active because they're not getting this positive message. Okay, here we are now at the conclusion here. So that change in this molecular stuff in your brain would change how your brain cells interact all the time. This protein, this receptor is just all over your neurons and it's not functioning properly. And this is basically like how the genetic part of autism works. It may be the receptor, it may be something else, but it's some part of this signaling mechanism is disrupted in some way or another. So that's just a genetic code change, not something that's like altered by experience. So if you were to get a vaccine or have a cold or something like that and ramp up immune activity, it might temporarily exacerbate the effects of that change in the brain. Maybe, I mean, who knows? But it wouldn't necessarily like set off something or trigger something that would permanently change the way the brain functions. Because it's, another example that I like to use of this is like the blueprint for this chair I'm sitting in. If it was accidentally like misprinted, so that when you got this chair from wherever it was ordered from, there was no fourth leg, and so the chair was just leaning this way, and I'm leaning forward the whole interview, right? And then like some water rushes in here and floods the chair, and the chair gets wet. Like the chair is just always this way. It doesn't matter if it got wet. Now it's just wet too, but it doesn't change like the way that it is, because that's just how the gene is encoded. And I hope that makes any amount of sense after all that explanation. But in that particular case, it which is like most of the genes associated with autism come back to this signaling mechanism. There are some others that are involved in like immune activity and things like that. And who you never know about a certain case, but like generally this sort of like vaccine induced injury model just like does not necessarily make sense, combined with like genetic, predominantly genetic cause of autism.
Do you have a hypothesis of what might be going on? Because I don't think moms are lying when they say my child was one way and then they're another. Are you familiar with PANDAS at all?
No.
He is pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorder associated with strep. It's something my son went through.
Okay.
And I'm always very clear about this, and then somebody seeks to misunderstand me. He did not get a vaccine first. That doesn't mean I'm anti-vax. I'm saying it for the context of he had a strep infection, because everybody always comes and says, your son was vaccine injured. I'm like, he didn't have a vaccine. He had a strep infection. Then I say that and people say, well, you're anti-vax. And I'm like, okay, that's really fun. Could we just like stay with the game that we're playing right now, which is that he got strep, his brain had an autoimmune attack. And that left him from a child who at 6 months had his first word. He's walking fine. He's hitting all the milestones early. And then at 5 years old, he regresses. He can't speak. He can't walk. He can't use the bathroom on his own. And it was an inflammatory issue that happened. My child was a different human overnight. We worked on that. We resolved the infection. We brought on anti-inflammatories and he came back. Some things residually were left affected, like dysgraphia persists because of the area of the brain that was affected in this. So having had that experience, I do tend to believe moms when they say something happened, my child was different. And so I think too often doctors jump to autism. It was something with my son. They were like, he must be autistic. And I'm like, maybe, yes, and there is this other thing going on. Like somebody doesn't change overnight. And so sometimes I wonder if like in these cases of what's going on, maybe it's not actually autism. Maybe it's actually something else. And I have the tendency to believe moms, but I also wonder if the tendency to be dismissing moms, dismissing these stories, and also being like, not ever vaccines. And, so if they even bring that up, I think bias comes up in a doctor's mind really quickly where they're like, I can't hear this story because she's just an anti-vaxxer right now. I mean, even as I tell my story, I had to be like, and let me caveat because I don't want you to misunderstand me. So I just wonder, like, what could something else be going on? And it's not even autism.
Yeah, I mean, first off, like, I believe moms too, like parents generally. I mean, I think I completely understand how frustrating it must be for people who experience something like this, where suddenly they see a change in their kid and then, they're listening to this interview and they're just like, screw this guy. He doesn't get it, right? Like the science.
He's
blah,
just
blah,
a
blah.
scientist.
Yeah. And I guess, and I like, I have a daughter coming next month, my first child. If that happened to my kid, I would probably feel exactly the same. I would be equally skeptical of vaccines and science. And I would be skeptical of people like myself for dismissing the idea. I guess what I'm trying to say overall is that within our current understanding of autism and vaccines and the immune reaction that it triggers, it doesn't really fit in that it could be triggering autism.
And I guess that's my point, is like, maybe what we're missing is it's not actually autism.
Yes.
Something else is going on, and we're just calling it autism. We're also seeing that with intellectual disability, everyone's calling that autism. And I'm like, intellectual disability co-occurs with autism, but it's not autism itself. And the slippery slope in that is that if we just call everything autism and we try, and right now, what do we do with autism? There's no treatment. There's no intervention. Really, there is like cognitive behavioral therapy, and there is like, going to occupational therapy. There's all of these things. But like, if at the crux of it is something else going on, then it's a missed opportunity to actually treat what the cause is.
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing about all this is like, autism is a man-made condition, right? Like, we call it autism because psychiatrists came together and said, okay, hey, we're noticing that there's a lot of kids who are having these like social challenges, and they also happen to have a lot of repetitive behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take those two things and pair them and call it autism,
Yeah.
right? Autism spectrum disorder. Like, this is like a tough perspective to share because it's like, it's complicated, but it's like human beings, every trait we have exists on a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Like I mentioned, introversion, extroversion, right? Like athleticism, how funny you are, like anything like that, how fast you can run, whatever. We all exist somewhere on a continuum. And for some of these things, we have decided that if you exist at some place beyond this continuum, that is a disorder, and it's in the DSM-5, and it's diagnosable. And in some cases, it's treatable.
And completely subjective most of the time.
Yeah. And so it makes sense that if you're going through something that at the time that you see the doctor for the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule, the ADOS, to get diagnosed with autism, if you are showing social deficits and repetitive behaviors, you will be diagnosed with autism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it is what our current psychiatric lens allows us to categorize a person into, right? But if humans were slightly different, we might not have classified those two things together, and it could be something else. So, and like we used to have Asperger's, right? And that was removed. Right now, it's just autism spectrum disorder. And so the experience someone could have in a clinical context 10 years ago or whenever that change was would be completely different because we had just different names for these things. And so there's plenty of medical cases that are not necessarily explained by our current understanding and the current diagnoses that we have. And so it is totally possible that we're missing information. And as an autism researcher, there's a lot that we don't understand about autism, for sure. I mean, there's like 1,000 genes that are associated with autism. And so, whereas if you have a change in the genetic code, it can increase the risk of autism. We are nowhere near understanding the contributions of all of those things, not to mention the environmental roles, and then we have the idiopathic, where we are just openly saying we don't know, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also, the other thing about autism, this is also something I want people to understand about autism. Social interaction, social behavior in general is so complicated and involves so many brain areas. And so there are so many places where a change in brain function can manifest as what we would call autism.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's almost like by the design of what we characterize as autism spectrum disorder and how like broad it is, we are just taking all these different neurobiological differences and classifying them all together, which may not necessarily be right. And I can almost guarantee you, my prediction is that in the next, whenever the next DSM comes out, or maybe it'll be 20 or 50 years from now, we will have all these different subtypes of autism, or maybe even an entirely new condition that we refer to, because it's a spectrum, right? It's autism spectrum for a reason, because it can manifest in so many different ways, which makes sense considering that there are so many different brain systems involved.
Yeah.
And so, I'm cautious about, saying like, well, when it comes to vaccines, like anything's possible. But like the truth is, I'm cautious about that because I don't want my words to be like taken and used as, look, here's a guy who studies autism saying it's possible. But
yeah. And because like you have a whole book where you've done all this research about social connection and how humans are behaving and how humans are behaving online. And so better than anyone else how someone is absolutely listening to this right now being like, how can I take him out of context to fit my agenda and then run that and make it viral?
Right. And so, I want to be scientifically responsible, which would be to say, the evidence says no,
Mm-hmm.
but you can never rule anything out. The problem with saying that is that, like you just said, it can be used to support a notion that I don't necessarily think is true, and that also is very political. So.
Yeah. Well, I also think that when it comes to science, people have to understand that science is constantly questioning and willing to be wrong and saying right now, based on the evidence that we have, here is our current understanding of things. If I am presented with new evidence that shows me otherwise, I am open to having my mind changed about that. And I think, especially as we've talked in the context of this conversation and the way social media has gone and media as a whole trying to shape us, it is that you are in this camp or you're in that camp. And I think the pandemic contributed significant, the whole trust the science, don't question it. People who question are conspiracy theorists. And I was like, yo, science is questioning. People should ask questions. People have absolutely right to ask questions and get the answers. And as health professionals, we have to also say, we don't know either right now. And I don't think enough people were comfortable saying that during the pandemic of like, we didn't get a playbook to this. We don't actually know. Like, we're doing our best. This is our best hypothesis. It was a lot of like, fake it till you make it kind of mentality in a way. I don't really like that term, but the whole like, we have to be strong experts who demand these things of you, otherwise you won't comply and we could have a higher risk. And I think that in a lot of ways that we rolled out of the pandemic with, there are people who disallow questioning science now. And then there are people who will never trust science. And that is part of this podcast of like, how do we get back to the middle where it's like, you can trust science again, but you also do it critically. Like you shouldn't, it's not religion. Like it's not faith-based. It is something that is meant to be questioned and meant to be understood.
Yeah. I mean, I 100% agree. I mean, I think what COVID did to science was, it lost a lot of people's trust because it made science pretty much the focal point of all of humanity. Everybody was sitting at home every day and being like, please, science, figure this out.
Save us.
Yeah, like let us out again.
And then I think a lot of people had to reckon with the fact that like medicine doesn't have all the answers and we can't always save you. And like that was like a big like, oh my God, kind of moment for people.
Yeah. And that like, I think that it was a major failure of public health messaging because there was an unnecessary level of certainty injected where it's like, nope. What was the controversy in the beginning? They were like, Tony Fauci was like, don't wear masks. And then right after he was like, wear masks. And like, I think the reasoning for that was that he was trying to prevent people from taking all the masks so that medical providers could still have some in hospitals. But then people are like, why would you say like, don't wear masks?
Why wouldn't you just be honest about it?
Yeah,
like we've got a PPP supply chain issue and like we can't have the general public wearing masks right now. So like we have to get it to healthcare providers. Like it was a lot of like trying to do the right thing, but justifying being dishonest with people because what your intention was a good thing, but being dishonest about any step of the way, I think was just the wrong move.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of it might come down to media too, right? Where like in mainstream media in general, like certainty is not good, right? They don't want a lot of what I've been doing on this podcast where I'm like, well, this could be, it also could not be, right? Like they want
nobody likes the nuance. That's not sexy. That's not clickable.
Exactly, right. Like
I'm failing as a podcast.
Right. No, you're not. But yeah, I think what the pandemic demanded was for someone to come out and say, we have a vaccine, and then people are like, they're looking in the background. They're like, wait a minute, this vaccine hasn't actually been tested yet. Like I want it to meet like standard requirements and it's not.
Yeah.
And actually what the scientists meant on TV, this is a fake example, but like what they actually meant hypothetically was like, we're on our way to a vaccine and we're testing it. But like, I think it was a miscalculation of public health messaging, and it was a miscalculation that insulted the average person's intelligence, where it was like, if we tell them everything, they're just going to be confused. So let's just tell them not to wear masks, right? It's like, that's completely wrong. Transparency is absolutely necessary. And yeah, I mean, science lost the respect of a lot of people, which is sad, because the pandemic and the science that had to be done to try to figure out what was happening and what vaccines might work and all this is not at all representative of how science actually works either. It was a window where everybody started paying attention, and they were actually reading the news about every scientific development because it mattered to them and their lifestyle, and they wanted to get back to like leaving their house. But that's not actually how science works. Science moves much more slowly. It doesn't go to the news until it's a real, like, much more certainty. When it does, it often conveys nuance. There's not public decision making hanging in the balance of what the science finds. And so it's a real shame that it all went that way, because for a lot of people, they'll never trust science again. And I mean, I don't know, like, what to say as a scientist of like, come back. Like, it's, maybe it's not as bad as.
Well, so I ended up being first wave COVID. I got severe COVID. I spent 4 months at home on oxygen. I ended up with long haulers. I had doctors who were like, you're faking it for attention, and like all this stuff. People making conspiracies about me. Like, suddenly, like, this conspiracy went around social media where the reason why I was actually sick is because I just got breast implants, and that I had breast implant illness. And that was the real truth of why I was so sick. And I was like, thank you for thinking that I've had a baby and that I've had breast implants. But no, that's not what happened. I hate to tell you this. I was also like, what are you looking at that even makes you arrive to this? Like, what am I putting on social media? But even me just showing up on social media, talking about my experience, Meta totally shut me down. I got shadow banned like crazy. Just being like, I actually have COVID. And many people were like, this is not real. And I'm like, I'm telling you, it's real. Meta's like, shut it down. Meta lied and said, oh no, we're not shadow banning. We're not doing any of that. Then 4 or 5 years later, Meta's like, we did. Actually, the government asked us to like hide all of your stuff. I'm like, why is everybody lying so much? And then being like, but still trust us. I want to ask you though, because like your book is all about how brains thrive with social connection. Brains and bodies die when they get isolated. Their risk of mortality is like skyrocketing. The COVID pandemic was non-consensual, okay, in terms of like what we were all put through, right? And this is not to blame anyone. There's a lot of doing the best you could, right, with the information you had. But it was a global experiment. And from the jump, when we went into lockdown, I was like, somebody better be taking data here, because when in history are we going to do this? What do you think happened to humans based on the research that you have in your book going through that kind of global isolation?
Okay, well, first off, I mentioned that, loneliness is associated with depression and anxiety. Depression and anxiety went up, right? And there's evidence showing that the longer people were quarantined or whatever, isolated, the worse their depression was, right? And people who were, what's the word I'm thinking of? Not quarantine, but like the shelter in place, basically. People had
lockdown.
Yeah, lockdown maybe is the word.
Was literally like what they told us it was. I was in Puerto Rico. They were like, y'all need to go home. They sent out this text. They were like, everybody needs to go home and be in your house by this time. And we were out to dinner with a group of friends. And I was like, we're not coming back out. We're not coming back out. And there were several doctors in the group, one an ER doctor. He's like, I don't think we're coming back out either.
Oh,
and then we went home, and then everybody got the text, you are not to leave your house. And I was like, that is not how, and that was like a jump start to like bad move.
Yeah.
Bad move. And then like we had lots of threats there. Like if you left your house more than you could only go out 2 days a week to get food or medical treatment. And if you're caught outside based on your license plate, it's 6 months in jail, $5,000 fine. And I'm like, what do you think this is doing to people? Like the governor at the time, the world praised her. Every time she got more strict, the whole world praised her. She made the news everywhere. So what is she going to want to do as a human, right? I'm getting praise. Stricter, stricter, stricter. At one point, we were like having to line up in the grocery and follow this exact line. And I was like, this is a perfect way to catch an infection. The way you're isolating our movement. There were just so many things that I was like, as somebody, you're also logical. I cannot handle logical contradictions. Like it makes my whole nervous system like want to rage, where I'm just like, it's like sirens.
Right.
Anyhow, I just took a tangent and interrupted you. Let's get back to let's get back to what the expert has to say.
Well, so I mean, people obviously felt bad, right? Their depression went up. And yeah, what I was going to say is people who sheltered in place, I don't know, with people.
What a pretty name for it.
with others. managed much better, right? Like,
Yeah.
people who were locked down alone had much worse mood effects. But the group that I'm most concerned about the outcomes of this COVID period is children,
Yes.
because we have what's called this, the social sensitive period, where in early life, the first couple of years of life, just like, there's like a language, it's a critical period for language, right? Where the brain's really plastic, can take in language. And so like children can learn like 5 languages, no problem. Whereas an adult, it's like impossible to do that.
Trust me, I've got a 4-year-old who's completely bilingual, and the 40-something-year-old is like trying so hard.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my God, you're preaching to my life right now.
Exactly. And it's because the 4-year-old has a much more, a lot more plasticity in the brain. The brain is more receptive to the world around it, can change more easily and stuff. So it's biologically easier to learn language. There's also a social sensitive period where in early life, these social brain areas are taking in information, and it's shaping our worldview. It's shaping our understanding of, what's right and wrong, how people express emotions, right? We're learning empathy. We're basically establishing this like moral structure of the world. And so if you do not experience socializing during those early periods, it's possible that basically you could be missing out on certain important brain shaping. And so there's a specific brain area that seems to be very sensitive to this, which is the prefrontal cortex. I mentioned it before. In humans, well, let me start in mice. In mice, there's studies showing that if mice are isolated in early life, like the first couple weeks of life, when they get to adulthood, they show like immature synapses in the prefrontal cortex, which basically means that neurons are not interacting as effectively. And so I think what happens is that the sort of exercise of interacting, when we interact, it stimulates brain activity, the cells are firing, and synapses are releasing neurotransmitters. And so the synapses that are being used are getting strengthened, new synapses are forming because the cell's more active. There's all sorts of, biology happening, but it's shaping and developing the brain. So in the absence of those interactions, it makes sense that you would see immature synapses because they're not sort of exercised as much. Then in humans, it's also been shown that isolated children are also, they show smaller prefrontal cortex, which also would make sense because without that exercise, they're not establishing new synapses. And so there's a reduced volume of this area. So, and also those children show like conduct problems more often than not, which makes sense because if they're not establishing a sort of social model of the world of, oh, if I step on your foot right now, it hurts you, it's bad, then, you're more likely to violate others.
And in the context of what you're talking about with socializing children, is it with children of their own age? Is it other children in general? Or is it just being in a family unit enough? Like, what are we talking about here?
I mean, I think any socializing is valuable, right? But probably more like diversity, like family, distant family, cousins, other, classmates. The more you have, the better, right?
Okay.
I think it's all just learning, right? The way I view socializing in early life is it's a learning process. You are just giving examples of different types of ways people present their information, different social cues, different opinions, all sorts of stuff that's important for shaping the child's understanding of the world and their brain too. And so, anyways, I think that in the absence of in the absence of interaction for a couple of years during COVID, there's probably a very major change in like certain generations of kids who went through that. And what's interesting too is that this is anecdotal, but I've heard from many teachers that as soon as they came back to school, when it was actually in person again, they had way more kids with conduct problems. There's one teacher who told me this story specifically where this kid would just like, basically, I was actually on Zoom, but it was like they were meeting in person and they had certain classes on Zoom, and certain students would just like unmute and just start talking to each other and like calling the professor names and this is college, like the ridiculous.
Oh, college! I was
college
like,
students.
yeah, like 9-year-olds. They don't know how to use Zoom, but
college freshmen.
Oh,
and to me, it's concerning. And then I also think about, now I'm getting like, this is a little bit of a reach, but prefrontal cortex, if socializing helps shape the function of the prefrontal cortex is also super involved in attention and executive decision making and stuff.
Like functioning as a human overall, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
being successful.
Right. And yeah, planning, all sorts of things. But specifically attention. And so, and actually there's, studies showing that in addiction, there can be certain areas of the prefrontal cortex that are smaller. And so theoretically, with this reduced volume, with this reduced brain power to control your impulses, you may be more vulnerable to addiction. Whether that's the cause or the effect, who knows? But you think about how a whole generation of children who may have suffered a failure to develop certain brain areas that involve focus and attention, and then all of a sudden, cell phones, social media, swipe, 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 swipe. And so I worry that the pandemic may have been like the perfect neurological trigger to make us so reliant on our phones and so easily sucked into just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And, I think that it'll be interesting down the road. I would like to see studies comparing like certain generations of children, those who went through those periods of isolation versus those who didn't, because I think it would be, there probably would be some noticeable differences maybe in brain structure, but I would start by looking at just like behavioral differences.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I want to ask you, you've had this whole, like, on your social media, this supplement series, because there is so much of like, there's people that are like, I'm a, Alzheimer's researcher, and like, this supplement does everything for the brain. And then there's some supplements.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, I know. I've seen it like 1,000 times. And I'm always like, listen, I love lion's mane. I love a lion's mane frittata. Like, I live in the Pacific Northwest. I'm all about lion's mane. The science isn't totally there yet. Am I still going to eat it, consume it, put it in my coffee sometimes? Yeah, I'm going to totally do it. But I'm doing it knowing that, like, this one supplement is not going to prevent Alzheimer's. Like, there's like many, many things that you need to be doing, right? Alzheimer's is complex. But my question is, what supplements do you feel are worth the hype as a neuroscientist?
Yeah, so that's why I created this series, is because there's so many, I was going to say prescriptions. That's, I guess, the wrong term, but there's so much advice online about supplements. And in reality, there's actually a ton of data on supplements telling us whether or not they actually do what people claim online. And so I just wanted to like lay it all out there. And, so I'll be going one by one for those who aren't familiar with the series. It's just each video is a different supplement, and I analyze all the literature, and I basically say, here's what I think. Here's what the data says, not even what I think. So when it comes to supplements, first things first, I think supplements work best as supplements when you are supplementing a deficiency. So
Agreed. Yeah.
I have a vitamin D deficiency. I have a magnesium deficiency. I take those two supplements because what I've learned as a neuroscientist through my experiments, where I'm actually going in and manipulating the activity of neurons or various systems, is that it is so much easier to take a deficient biological system and restore its function than it is to take a healthy biological system and augment its function. Like, it's unbelievable. There have been, like, for example, in my studies, we will do things where it's like we find a certain brain area that's like less active, and the mice are also less social. And so we go in and we stimulate that brain area, and the mice become more social. So we are taking a deficit and we're restoring it. So you might think then that if we go in and we stimulate that brain area, that the mice to mice that don't have a deficit, they all become more social too. Not at all. And that happens on all levels. Like, that's a behavioral example, but also like, like this protein interacts with this protein. So if you turn this one up, you might turn this one up. Nope. Only if it's deficient, then they both go up. But if it's healthy, it doesn't influence this thing. So taking a system that is already functioning well and trying to supplement more often than not is not going to do anything. But with that said, there are certain supplements that do. And so my sort of favorites are the ones that are like most supported by data are omega-3s. So I can't name all of them off the top of my head, but there are so many benefits to omega-3s. And gosh, I can't remember right now. I have a video on this that explains it very well. This often happens to me where I read the literature and I explain it in a video.
Give us the video. We'll link it in the show notes.
Okay, I'll send it to you. Perfect.
People can see it.
Because there's multiple forms of omega-3s, and one form, like, because you can have omega-3s that are like higher in one version than the other.
DHA versus EPA.
Yeah. And I forget which one. I think gosh, it'll be in the video, but having a higher dose of one than the other is a better is more associated with lower risk of dementia, and others are better for like heart conditions. But those are like very solid. I also take an omega-3 whenever I try, or whenever I
Is your wife taking omega-3?
she's taking a prenatal right now, which probably has it does have, yeah, both of those.
My sons, like, people will be like, oh, they should play football, which sometimes they mean American football and sometimes they mean soccer. And I always joke that I choked down way too much omegas during my pregnancy to have them compromise their brain.
Yeah, right. Honestly. So aside from those, I also do like magnesium. I also like magnesium is the only supplement that I personally take that I'm like, wow, this is noticeable. And I take it at night for sleep, and a lot of people do too. There's evidence showing that people who take, especially for those with insomnia, magnesium can help improve the duration of sleep. It can help people basically sleep a little bit longer and fall asleep faster. Again, I have a magnesium deficiency. When I take magnesium, I sleep way better. No question about it. I can't promise that the average person will experience that, but they may. So love magnesium, specifically at night. I take it like an hour before bed, and I get like noticeably drowsy. Okay, so this is an interesting one. Saffron. So saffron is, there is like unbelievable evidence suggesting that it could be an antidepressant. There's some skepticism around it.
I'm just going to say that saffron literally is something that saved my mental health. I had to be on Lupron injections, which put me into like chemical menopause like that. I took these Lupron injections for my endometriosis. Super stupid. In retrospectively, would never have done it. At the time, 3 doctors told me this was the best thing. I never respected the cognitive change that menopausal women go through when they lose estrogen to the degree I did when I experienced it. And I did a bunch of research on things, because I was even doing add-back therapy of like, I'm just going to put on an estradiol patch. I'm going to take progesterone at night. And I was like, this is not enough. I am so sad. I am weepy all the time. Brain fog so bad. I bought multiple of the same Christmas presents and wrapped them. So expensive, most expensive time of my life. Anyhow, but saffron was one that I was like, if it wasn't for saffron, I think I would have lost like my mind, like just in terms of like, also like I didn't even know until I started saffron how much it helped with hot flashes as well.
Interesting.
But you were saying saffron's super controversial.
Well, it's not super controversial. I mean, here's the thing. When you look at the data, if you go to the PubMed and you search saffron and you look at the data, there are a bunch of studies showing that it has really powerful effects on depression. That people, when they take saffron, they show all these like tremendous remission of depressive symptoms. They feel way better. And when compared directly to SSRIs, it sometimes even outperforms SSRIs. By the way, St. John's wort is another one that's like that. And also just a like medical note that some of these can have complications if taken with other medicines in general.
St. John's wort and birth control, don't mess with it unless you want to have a baby. And then you can also get photosensitivity with St. John's wort. So your skin can be more reactive to the sun. So
interesting.
Those are big ones to definitely know.
Yeah, I've heard that St. John's wort can sort of reduce the efficacy of other medications in general, but also if taken with SSRIs, that it can be harmful. Also saffron, I believe, with pregnancy. There's like a study that pregnant women in a field were like working in a saffron field were at a higher rate of miscarriage. Anyways, so, with any supplement, right? Like there's no doctor telling you, hey, these are the complications like they would with a prescription. So please always, you should look online and make sure that there's nothing
But
to worry
also
about.
talk to your pharmacist. If you're filling a prescription, pharmacists understand drug nutrient and drug herb interactions better than your doctor will. Dietitians as well are another resource. Most average doctors have no clue about supplements. They're just told they're always bad and tell people not to take them because that's like the safe default. But leveraging your pharmacist, they're super, super brilliant people that can help.
Yeah. So the thing about saffron, though, and I didn't know this, or I didn't realize this until I started talking about it on social media, and people mentioned on social media. So in Iran, saffron is like the number 1 export or something like that, or like the number 1 country that exports saffron is Iran, something along those lines. It's heavily exported by Iran. And all of the studies that I saw about saffron and its mood benefits were all done in Iran. And so this is one of those where it's like there could be, a sort of incentive, right? Because if there's all these studies that it's antidepressant, then, it boosts sales and helps Iran as a country.
Yeah.
And so these scientists, maybe whatever, who knows? You never know what's going on in the background. That's sort of the like conspiratorial perspective. The other like maybe more sensible perspective is that they're just studying it because it's the #1 export. And so it's on the mind of people in this country and scientists too.
It makes me wonder. I want to check the studies now because there have been studies saying, when you use an SSRI, like one of the big side effects that nobody talks about and everybody hates is lack of sexual desire and anorgasmia, inability to achieve an orgasm. And there have been studies showing if you take saffron with that, it can help mitigate that side effect of an SSRI, which I always bring up in the conversation because I think a lot of people like to be either or, where they're like, only use drugs, or they're like, no, use the supplement, drugs are bad. And it's like, well, maybe you're on an SSRI and you can actually do things so that you mitigate those side effects, because sometimes people are on a medication and it really is working for their objective, and then they're having all these side effects. So I always think it's wise to look at like, how can we lower the side effect? If you're getting the intended effect, but you're having these side effects, how can we lower that? But now I'm like, I should look. Is that study out of Iran where they're like, this helps?
Yeah. It's funny because that's another one of those dilemmas where supplements versus prescription drugs, there's often this sort of like division where people who love taking supplements, they're like, oh, I only use supplements, I don't take prescription drugs. People who take prescription drugs are like, oh, I don't even mess around with supplements. But like in reality, supplements are just prescription drugs that have not been regulated yet and like studied well enough to cross over into this threshold, right? So like there's a blend of allowing the evidence to lead, and there's some medications that are prescription and are not extremely effective. They're effective for some people but not others. Yeah, I mean, at saffron, I will say I when I read these studies, I was like, this is wild. I'm not diagnosed with depression. I generally have a pretty good mood, but I did take saffron for a little while after that just to see, and I actually did feel like I felt a little bit better.
How much were you taking?
Gosh, I don't know. It's somewhere in my medicine cabinet. I couldn't tell you.
I'm just asking because like when I went through this whole Lupron thing, like I kept coming across supplements that were like 15 milligrams, but all the research is like 28 to 30. And so I was really frustrated that I was like having to double things because I'm like, if the research is saying hit 30, then I want the therapeutic dose on that. But I was just curious, like anecdotally, like, did you feel better at like 10, 15, or what was the mark for you?
I definitely remember.
Report back.
Yeah, whatever dose I did, it was based on the studies that I had seen that I was trying to fall within, like the sort of, because generally what I see in the literature is that when there's studies looking at supplements, they all use like roughly the same dose.
Yeah. And that's the thing about the saffron is like 28 to 30 milligrams. I'm like, is that 2 milligrams making a difference? Like I have a big question mark here for that.
Absolutely, for sure. I mean, I think that's the other thing about like supplements in general, and the big question mark that everyone always brings up is like, you buy a supplement, it says it's saffron. Is it actually saffron, right? And people don't have like these drug testing kits at home to test for saffron. So it may say 30 milligrams of saffron, and it's actually 4 milligrams of saffron, and then the rest is whoever, whatever the heck is in there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's where third-party testing and verifying it is really important. So I want to hear from you. I read your book. I want to know, what is your intention with putting a book out about how, I mean, I love the title of it, but how community is so important to longevity, to, preventing adverse outcomes. What is your goal? And what was your passion, your desire? Like, you only write books if you can't not write the book. As an author, I say that. Like, it is the most taxing event of your life. You're about to have a baby, you'll still find the book writing process harder, I'm sure. And so with that said, like, what made it where you were like, I have to write this book, I have to get this out there, people need this information?
Yeah, I mean, I've been working as a neuroscientist for a decade now, doing research, and all my research has always had something to do with interaction. My first study I ever did in undergrad was looking at an interpersonal intervention for suicide prevention. So training students to recognize when someone may be suicidal and intervene and help with them, and then in my PhD, I started studying autism spectrum disorder and the biology. And then in my postdoc at Stanford, I studied empathy. And so I've always been in this sort of realm of social behavior. And I just think that experience, that this decade of my life has totally transformed the way that I just view the world naturally, right? Just as your medical training has completely changed the way that you see the world. And what it has afforded me is a deep and genuine appreciation for how complex our brains are and what the socializing it allows us to do, and also B, how important that is for our health and well-being. And so, in a what I call a post-interaction world where we're spending less time interacting, where this loneliness epidemic, this all the data, there's so much evidence for it. How much time we spend alone, like from 2013 to 2022, I believe. The number of hours people spend per month alone went up by 36 hours per month.
Wow.
We're spending a work week alone that we
Yeah.
didn't used to. Like, there's so much data. It's all pointing in the wrong direction. And my concern is I see why this matters. And the U.S. Surgeon General from the last administration was like, hey, this matters. But I don't think people really get it or care. And even since there's been a public shift in how we talk about it and recognize it, I still haven't noticed anything changing. And so my goal with the book was to imagine if nobody knew that sleep, not getting enough sleep was bad for you. And then a book came out that was like, here's why not getting enough sleep is bad for you. That's kind of what I'm hoping my book is. It's obviously not only about that. It's why brains need friends. It's about why socializing is important, but it also, truth be told, that whole conversation is really only the first maybe 60 pages or so, and then the rest of the book is taking that knowledge that I've gained and sharing with you, and then placing it into context of all these different situations in real life and all these different things that I think about that matter. So there's a chapter on drugs and how they influence our social brain. There's a chapter on dogs and how they can be important for supplementing interaction. There's a chapter on likability and the scientific factors associated with likability. And so I'm really just trying to encapsulate my understanding that has changed my life and my perspective of interaction, and put it all in one book. And most important of all, make it accessible. I'm sure you appreciated my first page as the no big words clause. It's there's no reason for jargon. It's unnecessary. This book is for everybody. And so I genuinely hope that people will, A, read it, and B, find that it shifts the way that they process their daily encounters with others, and maybe, just maybe, it will make them want to incorporate a few more encounters, of course, to the level that makes them comfortable and does not exceed it.
People who implement what is in the book, how can their life be transformed over the next 5 years?
I mean, immediate mood benefits, right, to socializing. I think it's easy enough to be like, oh, I don't have to read this book. I'm just going to go socialize with my friends. And that's fine too. Nobody has to read the book. But I think what I try to do in the book is explain, taking this broad prescription of socializing and actually making it make sense for you, and understand, where do you stand on this level of introversion, extroversion? What sort of social interactions are important for you? And so I think in doing so and being very intentional and thoughtful about how we are, the social lives we are living and the social diet we're feeding ourselves, that I think we can immediately experience mood benefits, which may benefit anxiety, depression, all sorts of things, right? There's all these benefits associated with being more socially connected. But in the long run, I mean, being isolated increases the risk of Alzheimer's and dementia, for example. And isolated seniors with dementia, their memory declines twice as fast as those who are not isolated. So depending on where you're at in life, if you're in your 60s or 70s and you're super isolated, then within the next 5 years, I mean, you could be talking about a dramatic difference in your brain health. If you're 5 years old, I guess probably this book is maybe too high of a level for you. But if you're
But your parents could read this book.
if you're the parent of a 5-year-old and you start implementing more social interactions, then it may change, the next 5-year window. It may change the development of your brain. Who knows? But I think for anybody, I'm hoping that people will read this and broaden their viewpoint of their current life and just start, I can't even explain it well enough, which I should be able to, but starting to see the daily happenings of our lives completely differently, where it's you ever have the experience where you could just walk outside to check what the temperature is, but instead you check the temperature on your phone?
Yeah.
It's like that. We do that
I
all
also
the time.
don't trust myself. I'm someone who's if it's 72 degrees, I'm it's so hot.
Yeah, true. But that convenience, right? Where it's we have thermoreceptors on our bodies to tell us what temperature it is. Instead, I'm going to check my phone. It's like that. I could go meet with my friend in person, but instead I'm going to just give them a call. Like, well, why?
Yeah.
Like, do it in person, or, I could go to the grocery store. Instead, I'm going to order groceries. Like, I hope people will start to see interactions less as inconveniences and more as like a health sustaining feature that we are lucky to experience in our everyday life. And when you have that too, I think it also sort of transforms your relationship with that part of your life where, my book's not out yet, candidly, at the time of this recording, but...
And I got to read it already.
Yeah.
I feel so special.
Well, and so few people have read it, and
Yeah.
thank you for reading it genuinely. And the people who have read it have said that basically they're like, wow, like, when I'm standing in line at the grocery store now, I'll like start a conversation with the person next to me. And like, I feel so much better. And that's exactly what I'm hoping will happen, is that we will start to sort of once again enmesh with each other and form connections and feel connected to our community, so that the sense of belonging we experience is actually tied to real, meaningful in-person connections versus like these horrible dividing moments we experience online, which are becoming an increasingly large part of our lives. So,
well, the book is fantastic. I literally couldn't stop writing questions. There were so many things from this book that I wanted to talk to you about that I think I have like 30 questions we didn't even get to. I could talk to you all day. We're going to bring you back. You're going to have a baby first. My wife is, but you're going to be there as a support system, which will give time for more research to come out as well.
Yeah.
So I want to encourage everybody, put your questions down so that we can come have you back and have another conversation. But for now, I have to say thank you so very much for writing this book, putting this out into the world, and for sharing your time with us.
thank you so much for having me and for your interest in the book, genuinely, especially at this stage where the book's not out yet and I don't know what people think of it. Your enthusiasm actually means a lot to me, genuinely. So thank you. And it's been an honor.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining the conversation. If you could like, subscribe, or leave a review, it helps me so much in getting this information out to everyone who needs it. If you enjoyed this conversation, then I definitely want you to check out this.